what's important to recognize is that if we analyze, in this case, 8 years worth of such information, the transit time from the Yucatan to the Florida Straits is about 20 days plus or minus 9. 9 is the standard deviation. From the Florida Straits to Cape Hatteras only takes about 15 days plus or minus 2. And so if you get oil or anything else into the loop current, it's going to move very quickly from those points. And so the connections are very quick from Yucatan to Cape Hatteras. So whoever set up these so-called large marine ecosystems, and they treat the Caribbean as one separate from the Gulf of Mexico, as separate from the southeast U.S. They did that strictly on terms of geometry. There's no science there whatsoever. And in fact, it's one big, large marine ecosystem, and the day we start studying it as such is maybe the day we start understanding our fisheries. That's just an editorial comment. Don't visit an economist that knows only how to fillet fish. Once the eddy broke off, it was essential that we document how it was behaving. So we started putting these real satellite track drifters into the ocean and monitoring them on a daily basis, because it was very likely that the eddy could reconnect again with the loop current and still head up towards the wellhead. It didn't happen, but historically, if you look at data, it's more the rule than the exception that it should happen. This time it didn't. Again, we lucked out. So we were doing this. And then we're also paying very close attention to the currents on the shelf itself, so the shallow water currents. We did this by analyzing both historical data and looking at actual real-time observations to see what the currents were doing at that particular point in time. And if we look at long-term means, this is from about 10 years of observations, there's a mean flow from north to south along the west coast of Florida, which was good with regard to the oil, because it would, which is bad with regard to the oil, because that would tend to bring oil our way. But if you look at the seasonal variability about that mean, what you find is in summertime, it goes the other way, which was very good to keep the oil up in the north. What I was pointing out to anybody that wanted to listen is that had this persisted through the fall, we would have been in big trouble here on the west coast of Florida, because we have very strong currents to the south once the fronts start coming through, which you noticed a couple of weeks ago. Well, we have a bunch of real-time observations out there. There are 4 buoys that were functional in some way during the oil spill. Those are the locations. And I was actually posting actual data then in these PowerPoints, trying to explain what was going on. We're in a situation called upwelling, and there's a couple of reasons for that I'll get into in a bit. But the water was tending to flow during a certain period of time from north to south. It was during that time when oil was moving very rapidly from Pensacola toward Cape San Blas. And the reason this occurred is the eddy that broke off of the loop current was banging up against what we call the shelf slope, and the loop current itself was hitting the shelf slope near the dry Tortugas. Those two influences were actually drawing water from north to south at that particular time, causing this anomalous upwelling and this tendency for oil to come our way. And fortunately, there was a competing influence between these remote effects by the loop current and the eddy, and the winds tending to push the oil back the other way. The winds won out, which is fortunate for us. Not so fortunate for our buddies in Louisiana. Along these buoys, we have what are called high-frequency radars that monitor surface currents. So we were doing that as well and serving that stuff up. And along with looking at what's happening at the surface, we were looking below the surface. And this is the part that's still relevant today. And so we would release virtual particles in a model and track where those particles would go. Not knowing a priori where the oil was subsurface, we did this at 9 different depths and then tracked at these 9 different depths, starting on 420, and we're still doing it through the present time. And so this is kind of the evolution over the first 2 months of the spill. at depths of 100 meters, 400 meters, 800 meters, and 1,200 meters. And you can see the deeper you go, the more constrained the flow is to flow along what we call isobaths. As you get up towards the surface, that constraint is a little bit less. Well, it turned out that this information was helpful to those that were going to sea and actually trying to sample the subsurface oil. And if you look at the 1,200 meter plot, and you think back to some things you read about in the newspaper and also in a publication in Nature early on, that's where they found the subsurface oil at 1,200 meters, or between 1,000 and 1,400 meters. And then when our guys left out of here, and they were looking at shallower depths, so they looked at these plots, the 400 meter one in particular, and then went searching there, and they found oil to the northeast of the wellhead. So we actually do have some qualitative confirmation that what we were doing is correct, and they were helpful then to those who were going out and searching. So we kept doing this, and we're still doing it today. This is from, I guess, 2 weeks ago. And the point is that the longer it goes on, the larger the distance over which things could be spread. In this particular model, we have no provision for decay, either by chemical or biological processes, and we have no confirmation. And so I don't know how much validity any of this stuff has anymore. Part of the frustration is our so-called federal family still does not have a comprehensive subsurface sampling plan in place, and so I doubt we'll ever know just where the stuff has gone. And cynically, I don't know if anybody really cares in the federal family to know just where this stuff is going. That's another editorial comment.
Thank you.
It's very important that we know, though, and this is the reason why. Because once materials get on the continental shelf, those materials can make it to the beach, not at the surface, but below the surface. This goes back many years. This is an anomalous situation we had in 1998. This is from a paper I published on it. But in Sanibel, you can see some cold water on the left. And that cold water didn't come locally. In fact, it came from the top of that line. It came from the Florida Big Bend, and it came along the bottom, not along the surface. And so if you can upwell water with toxic materials in the Florida Big Bend, that stuff can make it to points along the coast to the south. In fact, those are the pathways that fish lobby take. And so it's important that we know where the stuff is and whether or not it's upwelling onto the shelf. And indeed, we did have very strong upwelling this summer. And so these are observations made by USF, by what we call our profile of the glider team. And this is by gliders, and you can see temperature and salinity and chlorophyll and dissolvable organic matter. And you can see all the activity along the bottom. And so that cold water came in from across the shelf slope. And I've heard anecdotal information that we've had all kinds of deep water fishes close to the beach. And somebody was scratching their head and thinking, ooh, I wonder if they're running away from the oil. No, they're not running away from the oil. They like cold water. It was cold water. That's what they're doing there. It had nothing to do with biology. It had everything to do with physics. So it's critical that we understand what determines the water properties in our coastal ocean so we can understand everything else. And we have valid concern for subsurface stuff this year because we have anomalous upwelling going on. Okay, well, I'm almost done. Was our stuff used? The answer is yes. The left-hand panel are web hits at the website that my group maintains, and you can see it when there was oil on the surface, and then it went away. Nobody cares anymore. And on the right, those are the forecasts that NOAA put out on a daily basis. And if you squint a little bit and you look at it, you'll find that we're acknowledged, as I said, second only to NOAA. So on a daily basis for 4 months, this is what was coming out. And so yeah, our stuff was being used, and I'm very proud of that.